It's a consequential day for the United States and Iran, both nations holding talks right now. Let's go live to CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Kealy. Okay, so Courtney, same question. Iranian officials know that the U.S. is building up, amassing U.S. troops in that region. Does that provide any sort of motivation for them to bend any of their positions relative to having nuclear weapons?
Well, it's really interesting because we're hearing directly from the Secretary of Defense Counsel, Ali Shamkhani, on Twitter. And what he said is that Iran's non-manufacture of nuclear weapons is an alliance with the fatwa put out by the Supreme Leader. And that this is an alignment that could actually happen with Iran's Defense Council and might be happening in this second round of talks that we're seeing today. So we've heard that Steve Witkoff has said, why aren't they capitulating? We've seen the level of weaponry and armada in the region. We also are hearing, according to Pentagon sources, that there's a possibility that there's a complete drawdown of the Fifth Fleet personnel in Bahrain. So there's all preparations. Also, we're watching what happens when the Indian leader Modi leaves Israel, because he's there right now. So will Israel strike? Will the U.S. strike? Or will there be a deal? And so we're hearing also from the Omani foreign minister, who's the mediator in all this. He called these discussions this morning creative and positive. We know that the U.S. has red lines. Will they just make a deal on nuclear? The nuclear sites, Fordow, Natanz, they have really been decimated since June. Will they move the enriched uranium? These are all will they, won't they, will they, won't they read. And I'm so sorry I can't give you a definitive answer because the talks are going right now in Geneva. And Iran had brought the written proposal that President Trump wanted to see, and they took a break after the first round. They talked to the respective leaders in Tehran and D.C., and now they're back at it.
Okay, we know you're watching it. Relative to ballistic missiles, we know that this is also a talking point. Any reportable progress there?
Not really, because this is something that Iran won't talk about. They won't talk about proxies, and they won't talk about ballistic missiles, and they're very firm in that. This is a regime that has lasted by brute force and recent massacres. They're not one to give in easily. So we don't expect the Iranian regime to be okay with getting rid of ballistic missiles. But if there's any kind of deal, and if President Trump wants a deal as opposed to any strikes, they're going to have to thread this needle somehow about nuclear weapons and say the non-enrichment of uranium somehow has been agreed upon by both sides. That's where the sticking point is going to be, and they might just ignore ballistic missiles and proxies, even though the U.S. and the Secretary of State most recently said this is on the table, even though Israel is very worried about this, even though they pose a threat to U.S. assets in the region as well as Israel in the region. We really have to wait and see.
I got to ask you, given your years of reporting your deep sources in Iran, in recent weeks, even months, we have heard Iranians on the ground, everyday citizens, sometimes with their children in their arms, saying they want the U.S. to intervene. They are ready for change, regime change in Iran. And yet I'm seeing the voice of the Iranian people sort of take a back seat to some of these high-level talks. What are you hearing from the families in Iran relative to U.S. intervention?
I've heard this outpouring of response to a social media post from last week where I said Iranians are scared, but they're resigned that U.S. strikes might help them get rid of this regime. Now, they went out and protested in January, and massacres ensued, most likely the worst, bloodiest massacres in recent history. And trust me, the Iranians have a record of brutality and executions. We're still hearing about that. We've seen university students, now that have gone back to the schools have reopened post those protests in January, and they're in defiance. They're chanting freedom. The women are not in hijab, many of them, because they don't feel they need to anymore. There is complete defiance, especially from this young generation. And the one thing people miss that's so different from the previous conflicts where the U.S. involved, for instance, say, Iraq or Libya, was that the Iranian people are very sophisticated, and when they're able to use the internet, they're very vocal. And so I was hearing directly from families from Tehran saying, you're spot on. Please keep elevating our voice, keep amplifying our voice. We need regime change. That's not something that I hear from Washington. That's something I hear from ordinary people in Tehran.
Ordinary people, my bread and butter whenever I'm on the air. Thank you, Courtney Kealy. Always great to talk to you. So very much appreciated.